There is a moment most people know, but rarely talk about. You post something, a photo, an achievement, a thought you worked up the courage to share, and then you wait. You pick up your phone. You put it down. You pick it up again. And somewhere in that waiting, without even realizing it, you hand over a piece of your piece to strangers. We have all been there. Not just online, in the meeting room where you waited to see if your idea landed well. At the dinner table, where you chose your words carefully so no one would think less of you. In the quiet after a conversation where you replayed everything you said, wondering how it sounded to them. This is one of the most quietly exhausting patterns a human being can live inside. And the cost of it is enormous. Not dramatic and sudden, but slow, steady. The erosion of your confidence. The shrinking of your choices. The growing sense that you cannot fully trust yourself because you are always waiting for someone else to confirm that you are enough. Here is what I want you to know before we go any further. You do not have to keep living that way. The need for validation is not a character flaw. It is a wound. And wounds, when you understand them, can heal. I know where you are right now. Maybe you would not describe yourself as someone who seeks validation because that phrase sounds weak, and you do not think of yourself as weak. But maybe you notice that criticism stays with you longer than it should. That a compliment from the right person can change the entire tone of your day. That you sometimes make decisions based not on what you actually want, but on what you think will be approved of. That is the quieter face of this pattern. And it is far more common than anyone admits. This audiobook is going to walk you through something specific. By the time we reach the final chapter, you will understand why the need for external approval formed in the first place, not to shame you for it, but to free you from it. You will know how to recognize the exact moments when you are outsourcing your worth to other people. And you will have real, practical tools that you can use in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday when the old pattern shows up again. This is not about becoming someone who stops caring about other people. That is not strength. That is armor. And armor is heavy. What we are building here is something different. It is the ability to value connection without depending on it for your sense of self. To hear feedback without collapsing under it. To make choices that come from your own center rather than from the invisible crowd in your head. I also want to be honest with you about what this is not. This is not a quick fix. The validation habit is wired deep into your history, your relationships, the way you learn to survive. Telling you to simply stop caring what people think would be as useful as telling someone to simply stop feeling anxious. We're going to go deeper than that. We're going to understand the root before we tend to the branch. The journey ahead moves from understanding to awareness to practice. We begin by looking honestly at where this pattern came from and what it is costing you. Then we move into the work of rebuilding the relationship you have with yourself, your inner voice, your values, your ability to sit with discomfort without reaching for reassurance. And we end somewhere quieter and stronger than where we start. So, let us begin. Wherever you are right now, that is exactly the right place to start. Chapter 1. The Hunger That Cannot Be Fed. Picture someone you know, maybe yourself, scrolling back through old messages looking for proof that someone cares. Not because anything happened, just because the silence started to feel uncertain. Just because the need rose up quietly, and the instinct was to go looking for something to fill it. We have all fed that hunger in some form. We have all looked outward for something we could not quite find inward. And the reason we keep doing it, even when it never fully satisfies, is that it once worked. At some point in our lives, external approval was the closest thing we had to safety. Here is what I have come to understand about this pattern. The need for validation is not born from weakness. It is born from wiring. From the earliest moments of your life, The approval of the people around you was not just emotionally comforting, it was survival. As a child, being accepted by your caregivers meant being protected, fed, cared for. Your nervous system learned to read the faces of the people around you and adjust accordingly. A smile meant safety. A cold look meant danger. That wiring does not disappear when you grow up. It goes underground, and then it shows up in your adult life as the subtle but relentless need to know that you are okay in the eyes of others. The psychologist Abraham Maslow, who spent decades mapping what human beings truly need to thrive, placed belonging and esteem at the core of every human life. Not because people are shallow, but because connection and recognition are woven into our biology. The problem is not that we want to be seen. The problem is when being seen becomes the only way we feel real. Think about what that looks like in practice. You are in a meeting and you share an idea. Before you have finished speaking, part of your mind is already scanning the room, faces, body language, tone, trying to determine whether you were received well. Not whether the idea was good, whether it was approved of. You finish the meal you prepared, and the first thing you feel is not satisfaction in the cooking, it is the waiting to see if someone compliments it. You make a life decision, a career change, an ending, a beginning, and before you have fully settled into the choice yourself, you are already rehearsing how to explain it to people whose opinion you fear. The tool for this chapter is simple, but it will ask something of you. The next time you feel the pull to check your phone, someone's reaction, someone's tone, pause for 3 seconds before you act. In those 3 seconds, ask yourself one question. What am I hoping to find? Not to judge the answer, just to see it. Awareness is always the first movement toward freedom. You cannot change what you cannot see. And most people who live inside this pattern have never stopped long enough to name it. You are not broken for needing reassurance. You are human. But the life that is waiting for you on the other side of this pattern is quieter, steadier, and far more yours. And what fuels that life we're going to build together, starting with understanding where your inner voice has been all this time. Chapter 2: The Voice You Stopped Trusting. Think back to the last time you made a decision entirely on your own. No asking around. No polling the people in your life. No second-guessing it through the lens of what someone else might think. Just you and what you knew to be right. For some people, that memory is recent. For many, it takes a moment to find. We do not arrive at self-doubt randomly. Something taught us that our own judgment was not enough. And for most of us, the lesson arrived quietly, through years of small moments that added up to a very large conclusion. Here is what I have observed about the inner voice, the one that used to speak clearly before it was trained to be quiet. Every human being is born with an instinctive sense of what feels right and what is not. Children express this naturally, without apology, before the world teaches them that their preferences are inconvenient. Then slowly, through correction and comparison and the need to belong, many people learn to override that inner signal. They learn that their instincts create conflict, that their honest reactions disappoint people, that it is safer and smoother to look outside before trusting inside. The researcher and author Brené Brown, whose life's work has been a deep investigation into vulnerability and belonging, describes this as the slow process of trading authenticity for approval. She found, across decades of research, that the people who struggle most with shame and disconnection are not the people who were rejected outright. They are the people who learn to silence themselves in order to be accepted. That silence, repeated over enough years, becomes a habit. And eventually, you forget that you ever had a clear inner voice at all. Consider what this looks like in everyday life. You are standing in front of a restaurant menu, and you cannot decide. Not because the food is unfamiliar, because somewhere along the way, even the small act of choosing for yourself became something you second-guessed. You are in a relationship, and a boundary needs to be set, but you find yourself rehearsing how to set it in a way that will not upset the other person rather than simply saying what is true. You have a creative idea, something genuinely exciting to you, and before you have even begun, you're already imagining the criticism, already preparing the defense, already shrinking the idea to something safer and more likely to be received well. The practical work for this chapter starts with writing, not journaling in the broad sense, something more targeted. Tonight, or the next time you have 10 quiet minutes, write down 3 choices you made in the last month that were driven more by what others might think than by what you actually wanted. Just 3. You are not assigning blame. You are not performing emotional archaeology. You are simply looking at the pattern with clear eyes. Because the inner voice you learned to distrust has not gone anywhere. It has been waiting quietly for you to come back to it. The most important relationship you will ever rebuild is the one with your own knowing. Everything else we build in the chapters ahead rests on that foundation. Chapter 3: Approval as an Identity. There is a version of this pattern that goes deeper than seeking compliments or waiting for likes. It is the version where you have structured your entire identity around being what others need you to be. Where you do not just want approval, you have made approval the thing that tells you who you are. Most people in this pattern do not recognize it as a problem. They call it being caring, being considerate, being a good friend, a good partner, a good employee. And in many ways, they genuinely are those things. The problem is not the care, it is the cost. The cost of being whoever the room needs you to be is that you eventually lose track of who you actually are. Here is what I have come to understand about identity built on approval. When your sense of self is constructed from the outside in, from the reactions of others, from your roles, from your reputation, it is inherently unstable. Because other people's perceptions shift. Circumstances change. And if your identity depends on those external structures remaining in place, then every challenge to them becomes a threat not just to your reputation, but to your entire sense of self. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and went on to write one of the most powerful accounts of human meaning ever committed to paper, observed something profound about identity under pressure. He found that the people who retained their sense of self in the most dehumanizing conditions possible were not the people who clung to their roles or reputations. They were the people who had found something inside themselves that no external force could remove. He called it the last human freedom, the freedom to choose how you respond, regardless of what is happening around you. That freedom only exists if your identity lives inside you rather than in the opinions of others. Think about what an approval-based identity looks like in practice. You are at a gathering and someone misreads something you said, and instead of calmly correcting it, your whole body goes into response mode because the way they see you feels like the way you see yourself, and if they have it wrong, something essential feels at risk. You receive a negative performance review, and for days afterward, you cannot separate the feedback about your work from a verdict about your worth as a person. You end a relationship, and part of what makes it devastating is not just the loss of the person, but the loss of the version of yourself that existed through their eyes. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Drop your answer in the comments right now. When was the last time you did something purely for yourself, with no thought of how it would look to anyone else? I read every comment, and your answer might shape the next audiobook we create together. The move here is not to stop caring about how others experience you. It is to separate your self-worth from their response. One practice that makes this tangible is this. The next time someone criticizes you, even mildly, pause before you respond and ask yourself, Is this feedback about my behavior, or are they making a claim about my worth as a person? Those are two completely different things. Behavior can be adjusted. Worth is not negotiable. The moment you begin to hear criticism as information rather than verdict, you take your identity back from the room and put it back where it belongs. Chapter 4: The Comparison Trap. You are standing in your kitchen on an ordinary morning, coffee in hand, and somehow, in the space of 5 minutes on your phone, you have seen someone's promotion, someone's holiday, someone's new home, someone's body transformation, and without meaning to, without choosing to, you have begun the quiet, destructive arithmetic of comparison. We do this so automatically that most people do not even recognize it as a choice. But it is a habit, and like all habits, it has a trigger, a pattern, and a cost. Here is the truth about comparison. The human brain is a pattern recognition machine. It is constantly scanning its environment for information about where you stand, relative to others, relative to your own past, relative to some imagined standard. This was useful when we lived in small tribes where knowing your position in the group had direct survival implications. But in a world of social media and highlight reels and carefully curated presentations of other people's lives, this ancient mechanism causes enormous damage. Theodore Roosevelt famously called comparison the thief of joy, and he understood this not from a place of philosophical comfort, but from a life of intense public competition, failure, and reinvention. Roosevelt lost his wife and his mother on the same day. He lost a presidential race. He faced savage public criticism. And through all of it, he kept returning to what he could control: his own effort, his own standards, his own contribution. He understood that the moment you begin measuring your life against someone else's, you have handed them the ruler. What does the comparison trap look like in your daily life? You hear that a peer achieved something you had been working toward, and instead of feeling neutral, you feel a sudden drop in your own satisfaction with where you are, even though nothing about your situation has actually changed. You finish a piece of work you are genuinely proud of, and then you see someone else's version of the same thing, and your pride quietly deflates. You are in a relationship that works for you, that fits your life and your values, and then you see someone else's relationship from the outside, and suddenly yours feels like it is missing something. The practical tool for this chapter is what I call a standard reset. When you notice comparison activating, that familiar pull of inadequacy or envy or quiet deflation, stop and ask yourself one question. Compared to where I was 1 year ago, what has actually changed in my life? Not compared to anyone else. Compared to you. Your own baseline. Your own growth. The only competition that has ever been real is the one you are having with the person you were yesterday. Everything else is noise dressed up as information. The freedom that comes from releasing comparison is not apathy. It is focus. And when you are focused on your own path, you move down it far faster than when you are constantly looking sideways at someone else's. Chapter 5: The Courage to Disappoint. Here is a scenario that will feel familiar. Someone asks you to do something, to attend an event, to take on a project, to be available in a way that you genuinely do not have the capacity for right now. And instead of saying no, you say yes. Not because you want to, because the thought of their disappointment, their changed perception of you, the possible awkwardness or conflict, that thought is more uncomfortable than the cost of saying yes when you mean no. This is one of the most common and most quietly damaging expressions of the validation pattern, because it is disguised as generosity, and it costs you, slowly, everything. Here is what I have come to understand about the inability to disappoint people. When you cannot tolerate being the source of someone else's discomfort, you have made their emotional state more important than your own truth. That is not love. That is not kindness. It is a form of conflict avoidance that masquerades as care, and over time it breeds resentment, exhaustion, and a growing sense that you are invisible even in your own life. Stephen Covey, the author whose work on principle-centered living shaped the way millions of people think about personal integrity, wrote that the way we treat ourselves sets the standard for how others treat us. Not as a harsh judgment, but as a simple observation about the relationship between self-respect and the respect we receive. When you consistently override your own needs to manage other people's feelings, you teach those around you that your needs are negotiable. And then you wonder why they are always the last thing on the list. Think about what this looks like in your relationships. You have a friend who calls frequently in crisis, and you always show up, even when you are running on empty yourself, because not showing up would make you feel like a bad friend. You have a colleague who consistently oversteps, and you find reasons not to say anything because maintaining the peace feels less frightening than the discomfort of honesty. You have been carrying a truth in a relationship for months, something that needs to be said, and you have not said it because you are protecting the other person from a conversation that would actually free both of you. The tool for this chapter is a rehearsal. The next time you need to say something honest that might disappoint someone, write out the words before you say them. Not to script the whole conversation, just the opening sentence. Something like, "I care about you, and I need to be honest with you about something." Or, "I am not able to do that right now, and I want to be straight with you about why." Write the first honest sentence. Then say it. You do not need to have the whole conversation planned. You just need to begin. Courage is rarely about the whole mountain. It is about the first step onto unfamiliar ground. The people worth having in your life will respect your honesty far more than they will ever respect your exhausted agreement. And the ones who cannot handle your truth were never holding as much space for you as you thought. Chapter 6: What Silence Can Teach You. Think about the last time you were truly alone with no input, no scroll, no sound, no voice, not even your own narration to yourself. For most people, genuinely sitting with themselves in silence is deeply uncomfortable. And that discomfort is data. We live in a world that makes it extraordinarily easy to avoid yourself. There's always something to watch, something to read, something to respond to. And while not all of that is avoidance, for many people the constant input serves a quiet but important function. It prevents them from having to sit with the thoughts and feelings they do not yet know how to be with. Here is what I have come to understand about silence and the validation-seeking pattern. When you are uncomfortable with silence, with your own unobserved, unapproved, undistracted self, it is often because at some point you internalize the message that you, alone, are not enough, that your thoughts are not interesting enough to sit with, that your presence without performance is not something of value. The Stoic Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the Roman Empire while writing some of the most enduringly wise private reflections ever recorded, practiced daily what he called returning to himself. He wrote that the quality of your inner life, the conversations you have with yourself when no one is watching, determines the quality of everything else. He understood that a person who cannot be alone with themselves will never be truly free, because they will always be at the mercy of the next thing that fills the space. Think about what the avoidance of silence costs you. Your best thinking never happens when you are overloaded. Your truest feelings never rise when you are drowning them in input. Your creative instincts, your clearest sense of what you want and value, your most honest self-assessment, all of these live in the quieter registers that only become accessible when you stop filling every moment with noise. And here is the practical reality. Many people have become so uncomfortable with silence that they no longer know what they actually want. They know what they like based on what others respond to. They know what they think based on what they have been consuming. But what they authentically desire, independent of external influence, has become genuinely hard to hear. The practice for this chapter is 10 minutes of intentional silence every day for 1 week. No phone.
No podcast.
No music. Sit, walk, or simply be, but do not fill it. If thoughts come, let them come. If discomfort comes, let that come too. You are not trying to meditate perfectly. You are simply practicing the act of being with yourself. At the end of 7 days, write 1 sentence about what surprised you in those quiet moments. If what you are hearing is already shifting something inside you, subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell, because the next audiobook goes even deeper into mastering your emotional triggers and building genuine, unshakable inner strength. You do not want to miss it. The relationship you build with your own silence will become one of the most protective things in your life, because a person who can be alone with themselves is never truly at the mercy of anyone else's approval. Chapter 7. Building a life from the inside out. There is a kind of success that looks right from the outside and feels hollow from the inside. The career that impresses everyone except you. The relationship that photographs well, but does not sustain you. The life that, by almost every external measure, should feel like enough, and somehow does not. Many people spend years building that kind of life and then arrive at a moment, often quiet and unexpected, where they ask themselves who all of this was actually for. Here is what I have come to understand about values-driven living versus approval-driven living. When you build your life from the outside in, optimizing for what will look good, what will earn respect, what will be validated, you are using other people's measuring sticks to build your own house. And it will never quite fit, because it was never designed for you. When you build from the inside out, starting with what you actually believe, what genuinely matters to you, what you want your life to mean, the external results may be quieter, slower, less immediately impressive, but they belong to you. Oprah Winfrey, who built one of the most recognizable careers in American media from an improbable starting point, has spoken extensively about the years she spent performing for approval, saying what the room needed to hear, shaping herself to what the moment required. She has described the turning point as the decision to stop asking what people wanted from her and to start asking what she had been given to offer. That shift from audience-facing to purpose-facing is not a rejection of connection. It is a reorientation of the source. What does inside-out living look like in practice? It looks like making a career decision based on what you find genuinely meaningful rather than what sounds most impressive at a dinner party. It looks like choosing friendships based on who you actually feel like yourself around rather than who raises your social standing. It looks like having a clear answer to the question, if no one was watching and nothing needed to be performed, what would I choose? Not because external validation is evil, but because it is an unreliable foundation. External circumstances change. Other people's opinions shift. Your values, when you have actually identified them and committed to them, are the one thing that stays. The practical work here is a values inventory. Take 1 page of paper and answer 3 questions. What are the 3 to 5 things that, when I am living in alignment with them, make me feel most like myself? When have I made a decision I was genuinely proud of, not because of the outcome, but because of how I made it? What would I do differently if I knew no one would ever see the result? Your answers to those questions are the architecture of your inside-out life. They do not need to be dramatic. They need to be honest. The moment you begin choosing from your values rather than your fears, the quality of every decision in your life quietly and permanently improves. Chapter 8. Healing the root, not the symptom. Most people who decide to stop seeking validation approach it the same way. They tell themselves to care less. They try to become more indifferent. They use willpower to push down the need before it can surface. And then they wonder why, months later, the pattern is back, sometimes stronger than before. Willpower is not the solution. Understanding is. Here is what I have come to understand about where the validation hunger truly lives. It does not live in your habits. It does not live in your social media usage or in how many times you check what people think of you. It lives in the original wound, the moment or series of moments where you concluded that you were not enough on your own terms, that your worth was conditional, that approval had to be earned rather than being something you simply possessed by virtue of being here. The clinical psychologist and author Nathaniel Branden, who spent his career studying self-esteem not as a buzzword, but as a genuine psychological structure, described self-esteem as the reputation you have with yourself. Not what others think of you, but your own assessment of your competence and your worth. He observed that low self-esteem is almost always rooted in early experiences of conditional love, love that came with requirements, approval that was available when you behaved correctly, and withdrawn when you did not. And the tragedy of that pattern is that it teaches a child something false, that they must perform in order to deserve to be here. Think about what healing the root looks like differently from managing the symptom. Managing the symptom looks like deciding not to post on social media this week to avoid the anxiety of waiting for responses. Healing the root looks like sitting with anxiety when it comes, understanding what it is actually telling you, and gradually building a more stable inner relationship with your own worth that does not require the anxiety to be suppressed. It is slower. It asks more of you. But it is the difference between treating a cough and healing the lungs. The practice for this chapter involves something I call a compassion letter. Find 20 quiet minutes. Write a letter to yourself at the age when you first remember feeling like your worth was dependent on someone else's reaction to you. You do not need to know exactly when that was. Write to that version of yourself with the understanding you now have as an adult. Tell them what was true then that no one told them. Not to perform healing, to begin it. What you are doing is interrupting the original conclusion with a more accurate one. This practice, done with honesty rather than performance, can loosen something that has been held tight for a very long time. The wound that started this pattern was never your fault. And the healing of it is not about blame. It is about finally, gently, telling yourself the truth. Chapter 9. The practice of returning to yourself. There is a moment that comes in this kind of work, and if you have been honest with yourself through these chapters, you may already be feeling it. It is the moment when you genuinely understand the pattern, genuinely want to change it, genuinely have the tools, and then something happens. A difficult conversation, a setback, a day when the old hunger rises, and you reach for the old responses without even deciding to. That moment is not failure. That moment is the actual practice beginning. Here is what I have come to understand about lasting change in any deep pattern. It does not happen through a single decision. It happens through a series of small returns. You drift. You notice. You return. You drift again. You notice faster this time. You return with a little more ease. Over time, not in a straight line, but over real time, the drift becomes shorter and the return becomes quicker. What was an exhausting act of will eventually becomes a natural orientation. The author and poet Maya Angelou lived a life that required this kind of returning, from profound early trauma, from silences she imposed on herself to survive, from years of being told in countless ways that she was not the thing the world would choose. She said, and I am paraphrasing her spirit rather than her exact words, that she made the effort to be present with herself every day, to come back to who she was beneath everything she had been told she was. That practice of returning, of choosing herself again and again, produced a voice that moved millions. Not because she performed strength, but because she built real self-knowledge through the daily discipline of coming back. What does the practice of returning look like in your actual life? It looks like catching yourself mid-scroll and asking why right now. It looks like pausing before you agree to something and checking in with your actual energy rather than your fear of the reaction. It looks like finishing a difficult conversation without immediately rushing to find out if the other person is okay with how you handled it and sitting, instead, in your own assessment of whether you were honest and kind. These are small moments, but they accumulate into something significant. The tool for this chapter is an anchor phrase. Choose one sentence, short, personal, something that genuinely resonates with you, that you can return to when the pull toward external approval rises. Something like, I trust what I know, or my worth does not depend on this moment, or I come back to myself. Write it down. Put it somewhere visible. Say it to yourself not as a mantra to perform, but as a genuine act of remembrance. A reminder that there is a you underneath the noise, and she is who you are actually trying to protect. If this audiobook is adding real value to your life, do not keep it to yourself. Share it with one person who needs to hear this today. You might not realize it, but that one share could genuinely change someone's life. The work of returning to yourself is the work of a lifetime. But every time you do it, you become more of who you have always been capable of being. And what comes next is where we hold all of that together. Chapter 10, The Peace That Was Always Yours. Do you remember where we started? That quiet, familiar moment. The reaching for the phone, the waiting for the response, the invisible arithmetic of whether you measured up in someone else's eyes. You were not choosing that pattern consciously. You were doing what you learned to do. You were surviving in the way that once made sense. Look at where you are now. You understand that the hunger for approval was never about weakness. It was wiring. Ancient, adaptive, human. You have seen the inner voice you silenced begin to speak again. Not loudly yet, but clearly. You have recognized the ways that identity built on the outside is inherently fragile, and you have begun to build something more durable within. You have sat with the comparison trap and chosen the only competition worth having, the one between who you are today and who you were yesterday. You have practiced the courage it takes to disappoint someone, to tell the truth, to say no from a place of self-respect rather than fear. You have spent time in silence and found, perhaps surprisingly, that you are someone you can actually be with. You have begun to build from the inside out, from values rather than from the need for approval, and you have started to tend the wound at the root rather than managing the symptoms on the surface. And you have learned the practice of returning, that quiet, repeated, unglamorous act of coming back to yourself every time you drift. I want to be honest with you. This work is not finished. It will never be fully finished. There will be days when the old pattern returns with full force, when the criticism lands harder than it should, when you catch yourself shrinking to fit a room, when the hunger rises and you reach for reassurance before you even realize you have moved. That is not a sign that you have failed. That is the nature of deep change. It is not a straight line. It loops and stalls, and sometimes moves backward before it moves forward again. What you now have are the tools to notice, the understanding to be compassionate with yourself when you stumble, and the practice of returning, again and again, and again. Here are the principles I want you to carry with you from this day forward. Your worth is not a result, it is a given. Approval is a pleasure, not a requirement. The inner voice that speaks quietly and consistently knows more than the crowd that speaks loudly. Disappointing someone is sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for them. The The relationship you have with yourself sets the standard for every other relationship in your life. Now picture you, not a perfected version, not someone who has transcended difficulty, but the real you, moving through an ordinary day 6 months from now. Someone says something dismissive in a meeting and you feel it land, but you do not collapse around it. You hear a criticism and you separate the information from the verdict. You make a decision, small, quiet, just yours, and you make it because it is what you actually want rather than what will look best from the outside. You end a conversation and instead of immediately reviewing how you came across, you simply ask yourself, was I honest? Was I kind? And then you move forward. That is not a dramatic transformation, but it is a profound one, because it means your life is finally being lived from the inside. It means you are finally fully at home in yourself. Here is the truth I want to leave you with. Peace has never been waiting in someone else's response. It has never lived in the like, the compliment, the nod of approval, the recognition from the person whose opinion felt like it mattered most. Peace lives in the one place it has always been, and the one place you may have spent the longest time away from. It lives in you, in your knowing, in your values, in your willingness to come back again and again, to the version of yourself that does not need to be performed for anyone, the version that simply, quietly is. You pressed play today because something in you already knew that. Something in you was already reaching for this. Trust that instinct. It has been right all along. If this audiobook gave you something real, subscribe to this channel and stay on this journey with me. The next audiobook goes even deeper into releasing the opinions that have kept you small and building the kind of confidence that no one can take from you. Share this with someone who needs it today. And until next time, keep growing, keep choosing, keep becoming.